Shalom and greetings, all of you VFI News readers, supporters, and all the rest of you out there that should be watching every week. I hope you will be and that you'll subscribe and give a thumbs up. Well, it's been another tough week in Israel with terrorist attacks despite the fragile ceasefire in Gaza and Lebanon. Also, last Saturday, we saw the release of more hostages and the recovery of the remains of 4 others on Wednesday. But last but not least, the International Atomic Energy Agency has come out with yet another report warning that Iran is getting closer to the ability to produce a nuclear weapon, or many. Meanwhile, things are heating up on some of the other fronts Israel is facing, and the government is announcing new austerity measures as the economic news continues to get worse. All that and much more is just ahead on this week's edition of VFI News from Israel. We'll start this week's report with some cheerful news, as last Saturday saw the release of 6 more living hostages from the Gaza Strip. The names of these released hostages are Tal Shoham, Omer Shem Tov, Omer Weingart, Elia Cohen, Avira Mengistu, and Hisham al-Sayed. The first 4 of these hostages were kidnapped into the Gaza Strip on October 7, 2023, but the last 2, Mengistu and al-Sayed, had been there much longer. Both of them are reported to suffer from mental illness and wandered into the Gaza Strip while unsupervised, and Hamas took them captive, holding them both for over 10 years. It is amazing that they're still physically alive after all that time and all that has happened, but Hamas kept them as bargaining chips. Now, the case of al-Sayed is particularly notable, as his name suggests. He's not Jewish. He's an Israeli Arab citizen from one of the Bedouin tribes in the Negev region. His captors surely knew that, but it didn't prompt them to have any pity on this young man, who they must also have seen very clearly wasn't in his right mind. Neither his Arab ethnicity nor his mental health status made any difference to them, as they cynically held him in terrible conditions for over 10 years simply because he's an Israeli citizen. According to his father, he returned home a shell of a human being, with his mental and emotional health shattered. He's not even speaking. This should be more than enough to dispel any thoughts anyone has about Hamas being a movement that resists the oppression of Arabs by Zionist Jewish occupiers or any such nonsense. This is a group of people who have no standards of human decency or even any regard for the well-being of their own people. They're not trying to overthrow any oppressors or care for any oppressed. They're simply out to win whatever they can for themselves, and they'll use any means or methods necessary or any resources or even any people they can to get their hands on to do it. Speaking of which, during the handover ceremony last Saturday, when Shem Tov, Weingart, and Cohen took place on a crudely built stage in a cleared area of Nuseirat, central Gaza, there was yet another horrifying spectacle being filmed just a few meters away. Hostages Eviatar David and Guy Gilboa Dalal had been brought to the ceremony in a car, and they were forced to watch as their fellow hostages were released. So cruel. They were also forced to recite lines Hamas had dictated for them, begging the Israeli government to help them and criticizing Prime Minister Netanyahu for allowing this crisis to go on so long. Friends, to switch to commentary mode, this Friday, Israelis celebrated, last Friday that is, Family Day, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a testament to one of the greatest strengths of this country and also one of its most heartbreaking vulnerabilities. There's no denying that Hamas understands that Israelis value their children and families. They also understand that when Israelis see one family suffering, it's as if every family is suffering. That's why they brought these 2 young men to make this horrible video, because they knew it would cause more pressure on the government. Now, maybe they forgot about another Israeli family that they so cruelly murdered and used for their own ugly purposes, who were also buried in Israel this past week. I am speaking, of course, about the Bibas family. Yarden Bibas was taken hostage on October 7th and released a few weeks ago, but his wife Shiri and their sons Ariel and Kfir were not released. Then last Thursday, their remains were returned to Israel in an ugly and horrific ceremony that was condemned even by Muslim clerics in some Middle Eastern countries. The funeral for the Bibas family finally took place this past Wednesday. Thousands of mourners lined the streets to say goodbye to this mother and her two children, who never would have asked to become the symbols of the mindless brutality, demonic brutality of Hamas. Millions of Israelis and their friends around the world heard the heartbreaking eulogy delivered by Yarden as he said goodbye to his wife and their children. Landmarks around the world were also lit up with orange in a sign of mourning for these babies whose orange hair made them instantly recognizable. Yes, friends, speaking as a father and grandfather of Israelis, I can tell you from the bottom of my heart that family is very important to us, and in this, we follow the example of our Heavenly Father, who has made incredible efforts to maintain his relationship with us. Now, does this create vulnerabilities in our society? Yes, it does. We're ready to make tactical sacrifices like releasing hundreds of Palestinian security prisoners in order to secure the release of a few kidnapped Israelis. These released terrorists are likely to go right back to their old ways. It's proven. And we might lose more people in terrorist attacks because of this. Well, I'll say more about that in a moment, but first I want to finish this thought. Although our love of life and the value we put on the lives of our children and families do create vulnerabilities and problems, I say it's worth it. I wouldn't want to live in a society where children are taught that the greatest thing they can do is sacrifice themselves as a martyr for a cause that is fueled by resentment and hate and demons, and where the death of a child is considered valuable but the life of a child is considered worthless. No, friends, as awful as it is to suffer periodic terrorist attacks, economic problems, and all the other things we have to put up with in Israel, I wouldn't want to live anywhere else, and I wouldn't want my children and grandchildren to live anywhere else. I mourn with the Bibas family and with all the other families who have lost loved ones in this terrible war. But I also say, along with Yarden Bibas, Am Israel Chai, the people of Israel live, and we're not going anywhere despite the hardship and sorrow. Mind you, Hamas, I'll say it again, Am Israel Chai, you will be defeated. Now, on that note, let's get back into the news because I need to tell you about some violence we suffered just on Thursday afternoon when a car driven by a Palestinian man plowed into a group of people waiting at a bus stop near Karkur Junction, east of Caesarea. 13 people were injured in the attack, including 2 who were seriously wounded, while the driver of the car was neutralized by police at the scene. He was later identified as a 53-year-old man from the Jenin area who was married to an Israeli Arab woman and living illegally inside Israel. Now, he probably wasn't an official member of Hamas or any other terrorist organization, and we'll never know what motivated him to carry out what appears to be a classic lone wolf attack. But whatever, the reason this man decided to go on what he must have known would be a one-way trip, this is an example of why Israelis must be on high alert at all times 24/7. It's also an example of why Vision for Israel does what we do, supporting medical first responders like the Magen David Adom volunteers, and possibly one of our ambulances were on site. Well, these guys were there within minutes treating the injured. They probably used up a lot of gauze, bandages, antibiotic ointment, and other equipment in responding to this one attack, and there will probably be many more medical emergencies to respond to in the future. In the last 16 months of this war, this project has taken on particular urgency as we've also been providing equipment and training to volunteer firefighting teams, civil defense crews, and others. We've also provided hundreds of bomb safety shelters to communities under rocket fire, which are still needed, by the way, as this war is not over yet. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. Last but not least, we've provided direct assistance to hundreds of families in financial distress, including thousands of victims of terror attacks. So if you want to be part of helping Vision for Israel bless this nation, please visit our website, visionforisrael.com, and click on the Projects tab. No donation is too big or too small, and while you're there, be sure to sign up for our newsletter so you can also stay in touch with us. Also, it wouldn't hurt my feelings if you could share this video with people who know you're interested in what's going on in Israel and want to know how to pray into the situation here. Subscribe to this channel and so you'll be notified when new videos get posted, and this also helps us increase our visibility on YouTube. Now getting back to the news. I'll just briefly outline some of the other stories this week that are relevant to VFI's work in providing bomb safety shelters, because I'm not joking when I say this project is still very important going forward. In Syria, the regime in Damascus has begun to solidify its rule in the countryside. That's good news, because the only thing worse than having a hostile government controlling the territory adjacent to your border is having an ungoverned space governed by no one adjacent to your border. So the solidification of the Damascus regime's control of the areas outside the major cities is a positive development. The bad news is that the regime in Damascus is at its core a franchise of al-Qaeda. They don't have any heavy strategic weaponry right now, and they are trying to get on top of a lot of domestic issues that will occupy their attention for a long time. It's also true that Syrians are really tired of war and need a break, and this regime seems to recognize that, but Israel cannot be complacent because of all this. These guys are hardcore jihadists, and they have all kinds of historic, theological, and ideological reasons for being opposed to Israel's existence. It might take several years for them to get organized enough to come after us, but Israel needs to spend those years preparing for this confrontation. So Vision for Israel is also doing our part by providing bomb safety shelters in northern communities, along with other assistance. And once again, if you want to be part of that effort, please visit us at visionforisrael.com. In fact, write me at info@visionforisrael.com. And don't forget to click on the Projects tab. Now, Lebanon is a slightly different story, as Hezbollah has been absolutely clobbered, and they're unlikely to be able to threaten Israel strategically again anytime soon in the next several years, although I wouldn't put my money on that. The non-Shiite factions in Lebanon have shown great courage and willingness to confront Hezbollah in recent weeks, and that's not the only problem Hezbollah has. This last week, they held a massive ceremony in Beirut to commemorate their late leader, Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah, 5 months after an Israeli airstrike led to his demise. Now, their new leadership does not have anywhere near the charisma or intelligence that Nasrallah had, and they have lost much of their strength in the last 6 months. But once again, they're still a threat, and whatever force eventually takes over control of Lebanon is unlikely to be friendly towards Israel, although there are reasons to hope it might be a bit neutral. Newly appointed president of Lebanon, Joseph Ayoun, told the Iranian foreign minister who was in town for Nasrallah's funeral that the Lebanese people are tired and fed up with other people's wars being fought in their country. Woo, bravo. Now we're running out of time for this week's report, so I'm just going to quickly mention a few more items. The talk of war with Egypt, which is still deploying thousands of soldiers and dozens of tanks in the eastern part of the Sinai near the Israeli border, has noticeably faded this week. I never thought that this is very likely that this could even happen, and it's still necessary to keep a wary eye on this border, but for now that threat seems to have receded. A threat that hasn't receded is the threat of terrorism from Judea and Samaria. That's known in the West as the West Bank. But I'm going to tell you, from now on, let's just call it for what it is, the heartland of Israel, Judea and Samaria. Now, I already told you about the ramming attack near Caesarea, and this is an example of the kind of attack inside Israel emanating from the territories that we have to be concerned about. The IDF, the Border Police, and Shin Bet, that's like our FBI, are continuing to carry out Operation Iron Walls to push this threat back, and we need to be praying for them to succeed in their efforts. Next, I have to tell you a few things about Israel's economy, which, as I said before, is a mix of good and bad news, but mostly bad. The good news is a massive new shopping center opened this week in the Tel Aviv suburbs, and an extension of the light rail in Jerusalem has also been completed. If you've never been on it, you got to try it. Now, these are, among other things, a signal that people are still investing in Israel's economy and jobs are still being created. The bad news includes a series of government austerity measures meant to pay for this war, including cuts to pay for doctors, teachers, and various other civil servants. It also includes cuts to subsidies for public transportation, which will increase the cost of living for millions of people. Now, all of this is going on as the first phase of the ceasefire agreement with Hamas has come to an end, and the second phase, which was supposed to follow it, is stalled. U.S. Special Envoy for the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, has proposed a plan whereby the first phase is extended for 6 weeks, which will allow us to have a ceasefire during Ramadan, the Muslim holiday, and Passover, the Jewish holiday. According to this plan, Hamas will release all of the remaining living hostages at the beginning of the new phase, and then release all the remains of hostages who have died in captivity at the end of the phase. Now, Israel agreed to this plan, but so far, Hamas is refusing to agree, saying they want to trade all the hostages, both living and dead, for an Israeli agreement to end the war, leave the Gaza Strip, and allow them to remain in power there. That is Hamas. Yeah, buddy, that's not going to happen. In other words, they want to revert to the status quo, as if this war they started on October 7th never happened. They want to be allowed to rearm, reorganize, retunnel, and in general get ready for another round of hostilities in the future. I'm sure in their minds this is only fair, as it will also allow Israel to prepare for the next round as well. But what Hamas doesn't understand, is that Israel would rather there wasn't another round. Israel would rather this be the last war, and that Hamas not start any more wars or attempts to wipe Israel out. Rather, we'd kind of like them to reconcile themselves to the fact that Israel is here to stay and their dreams of wiping us out and driving us into the sea so that they can turn this country into another failed state governed by jihadist dictators not come to fruition. There's already several countries in the world which are like that, and the world doesn't need another one. That's why Israel has responded to the refusal of Hamas to agree to the Witkoff plan by mobilizing a force of around 50,000 IDF soldiers and preparing them to go back into Gaza and carry out a much more comprehensive search and destroy mission against Hamas than what's happened before. The IDF is already deployed and ready to launch this attack in the next few days if Hamas continues to refuse to accept the Witkoff plan. And a key factor here is that the Trump administration has signed off on this plan. The Biden administration wanted Israel to act with restraint, and believe it or not, up till now we have acted with restraint in the Gaza Strip. But this time, there won't be any restraint, and that's something Hamas needs to take into account as it decides what to do next. I ask you to join me in praying for wisdom for the leadership of Hamas and Israel and all the other actors in this drama in the days ahead. And as you pray, remember that Iran is still exerting influence on Hamas behind the scenes, and the regime that rules Iran holds the lives of the Palestinians and even its own people in contempt as it ruthlessly pursues its own agenda. Now, I want to continue the tradition of ending these reports with some good news, and it comes to us from Sheba Medical Center in Gush Dan, which was ranked the 8th best hospital in the world this week by Newsweek magazine. This is an improvement from last year's ranking as the 9th best hospital, and several other Israeli medical facilities were also ranked in the top 250 in the world. This is, of course, a source of national pride. But the sad news that must be mentioned is that although Israel's hospitals are top-notch, there aren't enough of them. We need more hospital beds in this country, more doctors and nurses, and lots of other things. So keep praying for us and keep sending your practical support in any way you can to Vision for Israel, and go to visionforisrael.com. Well, I'm Barry Segal, and this has been another edition of VFI News from Israel. Shalom, shalom.